as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Good evening, everyone. Great to see you back, and welcome to all of you who are here for the first time in our School of the Word. My name is Sister Leticia, and I would like to welcome all of you to this, which is the first session of our series following in the footsteps of Jesus. It is good that at the beginning of the year, we allow ourselves to have the time to pray and ponder about the direction God invites us to take at this point in our lives. That really makes a difference for us, people of faith, not only to look at our lives from our perspective, but to look at our lives from the perspective of God. Each one of us comes with a deep desire to encounter God, to connect with Him. And this time and space want to provide us with that opportunity to experience God through His Word, through the message that He wants to give us in the Scriptures. And when I was praying, there were these words that came very much to my mind. It's written in a document of the Church from Vatican II that says, "For in the sacred books, the Father who is in heaven meets His children with great love and speaks with them." And this speaks very much to me about what this prayer session is all about. From or through the sacred books, through the Scriptures, God, who is our Father, comes to meet us, His children, and He comes to meet us with great love. Not with indifference, or because He has no choice but to meet us. Rather, He meets us, His children, with great love. He eagerly waits for each one of us. On Monday, with the feast of the baptism of the Lord, we began the ordinary time, which becomes extraordinary when we allow God to enter in our time. And also the baptism of the Lord marks the beginning of Jesus' public ministry or public life. That gives us a clue on how to start off also our year. At His baptism, at the Jordan, Jesus queued with the public sinners. Jesus, who was free from sin, wanted to live in solidarity with our human fragility. He wanted to live in solidarity with us. As the letter to the Hebrews says, He calls us His brothers, His sisters, and He's not ashamed of calling us such. In the passage in the Gospel of Matthew, in the Gospel of Mark, when he talks about the baptism of the Lord, it's a very beautiful passage that we are going to pray about tonight. The passage says that when Jesus had been baptized, at once He came up from the water, and suddenly the heavens opened. Of course, this is a theophany, right? A revelation of God that was given to Jesus. I'm not very sure if we can remember our baptism. For those of you who were baptized when you were adults, I was baptized when I was a baby, so I have no memories of that day. But I'm sure that we all experience in one way or in another that the heavens opened for each one of us because it was an encounter, a personal encounter with God. But what is more interesting is what comes after, right? The words of God, when He says, "This is my Son. This is my child. My favor rests on Him." He says, "My beloved." This is the way God expresses who are you and who am I for Him. Beloved children. With these words, God acknowledged at that moment that Jesus was His Son, that Jesus was His beloved child. And these are the words that our Father pronounced over each one of us at our baptism, whether we remember it or not. He calls us His dear children, His beloved. And every time I read this, I'm very touched by the words that God says. "You are my dear child, in whom I am well pleased." Different translations say differently, right? To be well pleased I think God was very happy with the life of Jesus. And so are we called to live also a life pleasing to God. These words of God were encouraging words for Jesus at the beginning of his public ministry, where he experienced many joys, many moments in which he could see the action of God, but he also experienced rejection. He also experienced misunderstandings. He also experienced the suffering. We recall Gethsemane, he also had the moments of suffering. And these words of the Father accompanied him throughout his life. Whether it was a joyful moment, whether it was a sad moment, whether it was a moment when he felt abandoned, at every moment of his life, these words of God resounded in his life. During the year, in our own lives, we know that there will be joys and pains. That's also the reality of our lives. Therefore, God invites us to remember our deepest identity. Who are we for God? Who are you for God? You are his beloved child. We are his beloved children. And there are different ways through which, or in which the scriptures express this great love that God has for us. Like in the first letter of John, John says, "You must see what great love the Father has lavished on us by letting us be called God's children, which is what we are." And this word, lavish, is like he has given us an abundance of love. He has loved us abundantly in such a way that he calls us his children. That's who we are. And this is our deepest identity. Being a child of God is something that doesn't change, nor is it gone with the years. And on the contrary, if we strive to live our spiritual life, this identity becomes clearer and clearer, and it becomes more and more what we identify ourselves with. At least in my personal experience, when I first met God in a very personal way in a retreat, these were the words that really touched me the most when God called me his child. Not because I didn't experience the love of my parents, but because I was thinking, if my Father loves me so much that, no matter he's not a perfect person, but he loves me so much, but he's imperfect, how much more bigger and greater and deeper is the love of God when he calls me his child. And it is because the love of God goes beyond all limits. Being a child of God is the indelible mark that we receive in baptism, our identity, that doesn't change, that is not gone with the years, but that grows deeper and deeper. And that is the reason why our identity gives us stability in life. Stability amid this fast-moving and changing world. Who doesn't experience that things change so fast? And that the world goes by, moves so fast that sometimes it's difficult to catch up with it. In the midst of this fast-moving and changing world, where nothing seems to remain, where neither people nor commitments and sometimes even values seem to be changeable, sometimes we feel that the only things that remain are our problems and the challenges we find difficult to overcome. Yet, despite those feelings or even the difficulties we might face, God's love for us, our identity, and the example of Jesus' life remains. He doesn't change. His love for us doesn't diminish. His presence, his love remains, and it doesn't change. At that point of our baptism, when we were baptized, we receive a name, which is also of great significance. Or we were given a new name if you got baptized when you were an adult, or you choose a new name. Giving a name to a person is essential because we identify with that name, right? When someone calls my name, I immediately turn, and there aren't so many people in Singapore who share my name. So yeah, I know they are calling me, right? So giving a name to a person is essential. And in the scriptures, the name given to someone encapsulates the mission, the meaning, the purpose of that person's life. Is very significant. And when we see in the gospel, when Jesus changed Simon's name to Peter, he was giving him a mission. He called him the rock, and he gave him a mission. When we read, or when we read last month before Christmas, the Annunciation, or before that, the name given to Mary, the name of Jesus, when the angel said to her, his name will be Jesus. The name Jesus means God saves. It definitely encapsulates the mission of Jesus, to bring God's salvation to all people, to everyone he met. So, what does your name mean? If you were baptized when you were an adult, what name did you choose? Perhaps it's the name of a saint who inspires you to live your Christian life more authentically. When I was baptized, I was given a name, and that's the only name I have. I didn't change my name, and I didn't receive another name. And yeah, sometimes it's a challenge to live up to the meaning of my life, joy. That's the meaning of my life, my name. But yeah, it is definitely an inspiration, and it is definitely a mission, and it is definitely something that I can say is a direction in my life, right? Who doesn't want to be happy? Who doesn't want to be joyful? So yeah, our baptism marks a significant stage in our lives because it changes, in some instances, the direction of our life. Our name encapsulates also our mission. First, also when we are baptized, that moment when God calls us his children, that identity that we receive answers the very existential question we ask ourselves at one point in our lives. Who am I? Who am I? There are different moments in our life when we ask ourselves this question. Who am I? For God, I am his child. Who am I? His beloved child. Being a child of God means having someone who cares for us. Someone that cares about your life, about what you live, and is and will be with you at every moment of your life. It also means that we are loved, valued, and accepted, and have received a purpose, a mission that will unfold as we live our Christian lives following in the footsteps of Christ. Perhaps, when we look at the baptism of Jesus, we do not think much of our baptism, but in fact, it has a great significance for us because we are also given a mission at that moment. And because that mission will unfold as we live our Christian lives and as we follow the footsteps of Jesus, hence we have decided to start this series, Following in the Footsteps of Jesus. Because in order to follow his footsteps, in order to live as children of God, in order for that mission that God gave us to unfold, we need to be familiar with Jesus' ways. We need to be familiar with his life. He shows us how to live and how to live as God's children through his words and his actions. That's how he shows us how to live as children of God. He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And in another passage, he says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. And this is the reason why it is so important to look at the life of Jesus and see how he lived his identity as a child of God, so that we can follow in his footsteps, and so that we can also live as God's children, because that is our identity. Following in his footsteps, we will not stumble, because we will walk in the light of his life. His entire life reveals to us that we, with our limitations, our shortcomings, and our peculiarities, because each of us is very different, can live as God's children by following his example, following the footsteps of a life lived in freedom and authenticity, not in the darkness, but in the light. And that's precisely what defines us also, Being a Christian is precisely to be a follower of Christ. That's the meaning of being a Christian. It means I am a follower of Christ. But to be a follower of Christ is not just a title or a slogan. It is our deepest identity as children of God. We can live our identity because Jesus has given us an example. And at the Last Supper, after he washed his disciples' feet, he said, I have given you an example so that you may copy what I have done to you. And this is at the end of his life, towards the end of his life. He lived and he gave us an example so that we might do as he has done, so that we might live as he has lived, as a child pleasing to God. So, at the beginning of this 2023, because we are still at the beginning and soon to start a new year, right? But let's start with this 2023. So at the beginning of this new year, what is Jesus' invitation for you personally, as a Christian, as a child of God, as one of his followers? Perhaps to be more assertive as Christians following his example. Perhaps that's the invitation of Jesus for us at the beginning of this year, to be aware of who we are and to live that identity of being children of God. So let us spend this time of silence and prayer asking Jesus how to better follow in his footsteps. Given the situations, the responsibilities, and the commitments we have, because we all know that there are so many responsibilities, commitments, situations, but being a Christian is not a matter of adding activities to our lives. It is rather developing that friendship with Jesus that can help us to grow closer to him. At the same time, let us ask him for the courage to take the steps we need to live our Christian vocation more authentically. That vocation of living as a child of God. And that perhaps means ending, an ambiguous relationship that doesn't help us to grow. It perhaps means to ask him for the consistency to follow through with our commitments and our desire to follow in his footsteps. It may be asking him to give us the determination to take small or big steps in the journey towards forgiving those who have deeply hurt us, because forgiveness is something that Jesus also lived in his life from beginning to end. Or perhaps to faithfully go on in the journey of trusting in the call of Jesus to follow him closely. Whatever we experience that is Jesus' invitation for us at the beginning of this year, he commits himself to accompany us, to be with us. And so as we read the passages, that I'm going to put now on the screen, let us open our hearts to believe that God comes to encounter us through his word and saying, you are my child, my favor rests on you. And as we read slowly the passages, let's stay with these words, with the words that touch you the most from the passages. And let us start a conversation with God, who is present in the silence of prayer. And let us ask him, why do you say that I'm your beloved child? What makes you love me so much? or whatever question comes to your mind, in the silence of prayer, stay there and ask Jesus to guide you to that encounter with Him that can transform our lives, that can help us to commit ourselves. So in these 20 minutes that we are going to have, you can read slowly the passages and you can focus on that helps you the most. And we will come back in 20 minutes to do a Thanksgiving prayer. So if it helps you,